My name is David Palmer. I'm the acting librarian today, today only. And I would like to welcome you to this book talk. Today, the book under discussion is East-West, a memoir of Chris Patten. And I'm sure that everybody in this room has direct memory or just knowledge of those times, and so we are very anxious to hear this discussion. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Raees Baig, and the moderator is Dr. Law Chi Kwong. I will say some words about Dr. Law, and then I'll give the mic to him, and he will introduce Dr. Baig. So, Dr. Law is now an associate professor in the Department of Social Work and Social Administration at Hong Kong U. He was a graduate of Hong Kong U in 1976 with a bachelor's degree. He has an MBA from Chinese U in 1986, a doctorate of social work from UCLA in 1988, and then he just kept doing more and more things. He served on numerous committees in Hong Kong, such as the Hong Kong Council of Social Service. He has also served as a member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong during two periods for a total of about, 8 years. And now he is currently the chairman of the Executive Committee of the Community Care Fund. He's a member of the Child Development Fund, the Commission on Strategic Development, and the Lands and Development Advisory Committee of the Hong Kong SAR government. So please welcome our speaker and moderator.
Thank you. Good evening. My job here this evening is, I would say, I'll upgrade myself. I'll be the director or directing the mic, where the mic should be hanging around if you want to speak after Raees' presentation. And the other job is to introduce Raees. I in fact have difficulty always trying to introduce Raees. She is one of my students. She joined our bachelor program. I hate to mention years, so forget about a year. And she was, at that time, one of the students we would like to attract into our Bachelor of Social Work program. And I don't know why she was convinced, but then she definitely one of the what we call star students who want to attract. And so she joined our program, and she graduated with her social work degree, and then after some time she came back and take her doctorate. And I was not supposed to be her supervisor, but somehow we mistaken that I should be her supervisor. So I've been supervising her all the way, and then suddenly at the end of the day, when she's going to the examination, then we discover I'm not actually formally her supervisor. So that's good. I become her examiner. But anyway, we're affiliated and work together at times, and particularly the recent joint effort we have is to try to promote what we call social impact analysis of social welfare program. So I sort of make up a very attractive name for her single person center, which is called the Center of Impact Assessment.
Center for Social Impact.
Okay, Center for Social Impact, CSI. Okay, that is CSI. It's a very good name. But anyway, she's now looking around for good ventures.
Good ventures.
For the future. So if any have good ideas, you can talk to Raees. Raees is very active in the area of trying to promote the welfare and rights of people, ethnic minority in Hong Kong. And perhaps I hate to describe her ethnicity, because she looks Chinese, but she also looks Pakistani. And I remember when she helped the RTHK to run the city forum one day, and then the next day in the newspaper it said 中巴女神. I was a little bit confused. What is 中巴女神? And And Zhongba, to me, in the old days, is the
China
China motor bus in Hong Kong. So, I find it difficult to figure out. And then I realized, oh, it's about her ethnicity. And it's Chinese and Pakistani. So here it is, maybe in no further ado, I'll leave the time to Raees to make a presentation about this particular book and the man, Chris Patten. I sort of know him personally, and I haven't read his book. But before he published his book, we have a chance to talk about and actually debate on the idea about East and West and some of the, I would say there are some disagreement at least, but that may be a topic we may have to discuss later on.
Yeah.
And perhaps the time I'll leave it to Raees. Give a big applause to Raees.
Okay. Thank you, CK, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. And it is really my pleasure to see all of you here today because it's my first book talk, and it's a book. Yes, can you hear?
I see. Well,
yes. Can you hear clearly? Is anyone? Yeah. So it's okay, right? The voice and the sound is okay. Good. And yeah, it's my first book talk, and it is a book which has been published for 14, 15 years, so it still got some interest in you. So I'm quite surprised and happy to see that. But it's always been my pleasure in this book because of, first of all, because it talks about the time, the colonial time, which we so-called as being labeled as post-80s, being lost in that period of time. And also for being written by Chris Patten. He's actually one of my idols, I can say, for his movement in human rights and equality and all his ideology in bringing up equality in Hong Kong and promoting human rights. Even though when he was at that time facing a lot of struggles from the British and from the Chinese government, which actually, CK, you may give me some more ideas later whether my impression is right or wrong. But then this is actually my reason for choosing the book. I just want to make a little rundown for this presentation. First of all, I would like to talk more about why I'm choosing this book. And another thing is, this book is pretty thick indeed. So if you ask me, I didn't read every single word in it, so don't challenge me on it. But then there are a few concepts or ideas I would like to focus more on, which is the Asian values. We have more talk about, especially these days, during the chief executive election, we have been focusing on about the discussion on Hong Kong core value. So it's another reason for me to bring up or revisit this book again. When we are talking about Hong Kong core value during the chief executive election, which the three candidates are being challenged for, they're not upholding Hong Kong core values. So what exactly are Hong Kong core values are we talking about? The rule of law, democracy, human rights, are these being universally accepted or acknowledged in Hong Kong by Hong Kong citizens, that these are our values? Or economic development, free market, or open door economy. These are another type of core values in Hong Kong. So what exactly are we meaning about? So actually Chris Patten has a huge chapter on it, talking about Asian values, what is on democracy in Asia, and also whether democracy or authoritarian rule should be in Asia. And another focus I would like to bring about is on the position of democracy, freedom, and human rights development in Asia, or particularly in Hong Kong, because my own experience is that actually, I guess in Hong Kong, we do not have a lot of occasions or knowledge on human rights or information regarding human rights or equality. We just got a piecemeal understanding through the media or the newspaper when there are some equality struggles, or there may be a legislation coming up, which is talking more about, if I was more familiar with, is the legislation on racial discrimination And at that time, it's more discussion on about equal rights, on also all these kinds of concepts. But other than that, this period of time, actually, we do not have a lot of occasion or situation for us to know more about the human rights situation. But then actually, Hong Kong has signed up a lot of UN human rights treaties, and they are applicable or being ratified in Hong Kong for more than 30 years. So they have impact in Hong Kong for a long time. But then what these impacts are, and whether as a citizen we have a say in it, and we can use these kind of human rights treaties to change Hong Kong's situation. Especially nowadays, we have been facing all kinds of challenges after the handover for 15 years. Recently, we talked about the freedom of expressions or press freedom being violated or being jeopardized in Hong Kong. So what is the human rights direction? So this is the major two focusing point for this presentation. And finally, I would like to take this as an opportunity or as a platform for all of us here to talk, or you can express your views on what or how Hong Kong should proceed with our human rights and democracy development under different kinds of pressure from different parties or shifting ideology of our own territory, and also the influence by the Chinese government on also international relationships on influencing or focusing on Hong Kong on the international platform per se, is if Hong Kong is still under international spotlight is another point. So just to make a short rundown for this presentation, I hope it looks fine to you. If not, you can just stop me anytime if I talk too much. So first is the reason for choosing this book. I guess it's quite clear that it's because of my idol and the period of time, because at that time I was still, during the handover period, I was still you can say a teenager. So we are all very confused of what's happening or what's going on during that period of time. Being educated in an English school and all of our education or background are so-called asking us to praise how great the British government is to Hong Kong. It helped to prosperous Hong Kong's economic development. It gives us or grants us democracy or human rights protections. So at that time, I do have a very positive image on British ruling, especially focusing on Hong Kong. But then this image starts to change when I first graduated, as Dr. Law said, from a social work degree, and I started working in a human rights organization and started to know that there are lots of UN treaties and human rights standards actually are applicable in Hong Kong more than 30 years of time. So, but then all this human rights development or democratic development are actually starting right before the handover. So if the British government is really having a strong passion towards upholding human rights standards in Hong Kong, why after ratifying all these kind of human rights treaties and standards for more than 30 years of time, we still do not implement locally these human rights, whereas the Bill of Rights Ordinance just came after 1990s. So what makes this so, the development is being so retarded if the British government really wants to have democracy or human rights in Hong Kong. So this makes me question about what exactly the discussion during that period of time, what we have been discussed, and is really the British government's sole interest in Hong Kong is the human rights democracy, which the British government has always been using these kinds of concepts to attack the Chinese or other Asian countries for being unable to uphold democracy in their countries. So this brings me to this book, and I'd like to read it through to see what's Chris Patten's view and what his ideology is about. So this basically is my choosing this book. as in personal interest. But then besides personal interest, as I've mentioned, this book has been for 15 years already. I don't think 15 years is quite a long time, and things got happen, changing around. But why still in this, in present states, I'm still bringing up this book? I guess it's about ideology is something that you cannot change, and values, you cannot change or shift your values just because of the change in situation. Chris Patten has actually talked about politics is about ideas. Ideas you cannot give up easily, because if you give up your ideas or your values, people would not respect that as your strong argument, and people would not see that this idea or value you are upholding is worth to be respected. So I guess in that sense, even if it was a book that is 15 years ago, values cannot change. Human rights and democracy values are still applicable and still worth striving for in Hong Kong. So I guess it is the right time during this period when we are all talking about human rights being violated, press freedom being violated, and our democratic movement are being restricted. It's time for us to revisit what is our human rights and democracy standards in Hong Kong. So this book actually is another point to, I guess it's an interesting point to point out. This book is I guess most of you may know, it is a book which Murdoch has forbidden to publish, because Murdoch at that time would like to develop its publication industry in China. So in that sense, I guess this book has certain inside story about the China and about this arguments within the Chinese government that should be worth to look at. That's why I would like to introduce this book to you again. I guess most of you may know this about, and Chris Patten have actually been coming back to Hong Kong a few times talking about this book. So probably you have got some ideas on it. So when talking about this book, it's actually divided into 3 parts. The first part is on purely about Chris Patten's experience in his governance, and the second part is on his view on Hong Kong, what is an Asian values and how Hong Kong should proceed. And the third part is looking at the future of Hong Kong, the direction of development. So I'd like to before start talking about Asian values and also how democracy should be proceed, I guess this is more important to look at Chris Patten's own political ideology. And I guess Dr. Law at this point can also correct me if I'm wrong, anything which I've been interpreted wrong. First of all, I guess he is a very liberal Democrat, which democracy is something I have upheld, but on his view on liberal side, I guess I may not be too supportive on his, being a liberal Democrat. By liberal, he meant that, in his quote, simply that we can live on our own life, think our own thoughts, speak out our own minds. I guess this one is quite universal belief, and nobody could subject it. But then he actually have talked about his idea and support towards free market, and he said that freedom is the ability to work on free economy, and freedom is related to democracy. This one is quite correct. Freedom and democracy, there should be a strong linkage. But freedom and economic linking up together, this is an idea which I do not support, because he actually talks about Hong Kong's Democrats are not Democrats, because they always bring up welfareism and your argument towards universal pensions. These are not being freedom ideas. These are more socialist ideas to him. So he actually thinks that Democrats in Hong Kong are not Democrats. They are just maybe, in another form, I consider it may be social democrats or democratic socialists, as you've put them. So it's still not liberal Democrats. And his free market economy is a point which I cannot agree on. And also, the point is, he talks about privatization, how government or public services, goods and services can be privatized. I guess this one is also another direction which Hong Kong has been trying to go about. But I mean, for myself, I do uphold democratic values and human rights values, but then I do not support the idea of too much privatizations. Because I guess if you have freedom and democracy together, then it may be a way to control how the free market is going, or direct how the free market is going, because you have democratic system for the citizens to govern or monitor the free market. But then in Hong Kong, it's another way, or it's another sense. We do not have democracy right now, we just have freedom. Free market is a concept that finally becomes only the big monopoly, could monopolize all the businesses. Is that still a freedom to me? I don't think so, because I could not have a freedom of choice of what kind of service I should choose for. When all the estates, shopping malls are being monopolized, I do not have a choice to choose what kind of shop I can go to. I could only go to the big shopping markets. Is that one still a choice for me, or still a freedom for me? Or maybe there is another kind of interpretation for freedom, but that's mine. I do not have a freedom to choose anymore. So actually my freedom has been infringed under this free market economy system. Okay, so that is actually one of the ideology that Chris Patten is upholding, but I'm not quite sure I'm agree with him or not. But then another point is, besides that, I am really admire of his passion towards upholding human rights, because at that time, China has just opened up its economic market. All the countries are looking for this big meat, in Chinese word. So everybody would like to take a piece from China or take some advantage to get inside the Chinese market. So if you want to access to the China market, you have to, in the word mentioned in his book, is called 口头 to the Chinese government, 口头 which is bound to the Chinese government. So he's assuming that many of the Western countries has been bounding to the Chinese government to speak whatever the Chinese government would like to hear. Human rights, democracy, these kinds of values and concepts are totally against the Chinese value or the Chinese government's ideology. So at that time, some of the Westerners, especially the businessmen, those in the Britain, which Chris Patten has been mentioning as collaborators, are still against Chris Patten's strong position in upholding human rights when he's dealing with the handover issues. So, but then because of his passion, and we did successfully, to a certain extent, we have some democratic development at that time, especially for the Legislative Council or the institutional arrangement for democratic elections. But of course, after the handover, we can see that there may be a backward rolling on our development on democracy, but which actually, I guess most of us here has expected this rollback because of the Chinese disagreement towards democracy. But then his passion towards upholding democracy, even all the force or all his friends, so-called friends, are being against his act towards helping Hong Kong to proceed with our human rights development. So I guess this one is his another ideology. But whether or not it is successful or not, I guess it's still questionable, because of course ideology are our basic values which governs us or guide us on our work. But whether the other countries are picking up these values is still questionable. So to him, freedom and democracy could not be separated, and that's why with Hong Kong being the most freest society, then there should be democracy. So that's why that's his ideology to move forward with democratic movement. And that's what I really appreciate his ideology, no matter it's successful or not. But this actually brings us to the argument on what is Asian values. Because when we are talking about his efforts in upholding human rights and democracy in Hong Kong and arguing with the Chinese government and becoming so-called the 千古罪人, sinner in 1,000 years, if you say. This is the term which the Chinese government has granted him. Wow, granted him forever. So that means that he has been constantly struggling with the Chinese government on these values. So this brings us to the idea is, what exactly are the differences between his value and the Chinese value? Are they really different, or is these differences can be classified as the Western values versus the Asian values? In his books, he has talked about Asian values, not just his own idea or the Chinese interpreting the Chinese government's idea, but also talking to Lee Kuan Yew at that time in Singapore about what Lee Kuan Yew has think about Asian values and why being an authoritarian Singapore could not proceed with democracy. So in his expression and in his conversation with Lee Kuan Yew, Asian values are actually deep-rooted Confucianism, which actually I am quite questionable. If you are talking about Confucianism, is Hong Kong really that Confucius? I don't really think so. And is China really upholding Confucianism? And if you are talking about Asian values, how many countries are we counting as Confucius binding countries? Are we talking about just Chinese dominant cities or countries? Asian, I guess, do not just involve China, Taiwan, Singapore. We still got a lot of countries, right? We still have some Islamic-based countries, and India is a democratic country. Although in the book he argued that India has only political democracy, but not economic freedom. That's why India has failed in this democratic movement, or being a free country, or being unable to proceed with what we so-called being the strongest country. Of course, that was 15 years ago. The situation for India and China right now has been different, because you can see the blooming of India as another strong power in Asia. So whereas Asian values, beside Confucianism, and it focuses on order, stability, hierarchy, family, and self-discipline. All these are the basic Asian values. And these values govern that people, individuals in different societies, in Asian countries, they should put the country in the first place rather than individual values. So all these family, stability, law and order, no, not law and order, just order, should put forward in the country and see individuals as helping to facilitate community order. But whereas for what is Western interest of values, it's just simple. Freedom and democracy and the rule of law. I guess Hong Kong got two Western values, at least, is the rule of law and freedom. But then, when we are talking about the argument on Asian values, not just I'm questionable about our upholding Confucianism, but then I'm quite questionable on Chris Patten's argument as well, as labeling these as Asian values. Because in his book, he has talked about these are the Asian values mentioned or being upheld by the four tigers. Four tigers, in his senses, because why he is using four tigers? Because it is these places have successfully in their economic development. That's why they are so called as being as the successful examples in Asia. And because of their successfulness, that's why Asian values have achieved what they have achieved in economic situation. So in that sense, actually, Chris Patten has given credits to these 4 tigers because he has, rather than choosing other Asian countries as examples, he got these 4 tigers. These 4 tigers are the places where uphold of authoritarianism and strict ruling. So because of their successes in economic, it seems to be that these values had helped these countries to achieve the economic successfulness. So in that sense, I guess Chris Patten's argument is quite weak, because if you have acknowledged the economic development, then on the other hand, you are arguing that these values are not applicable internationally or is different from the Western value in westernized places to achieve the economic development. So why you have to choose these 4 places as examples to demonstrate that Asian values is not working or is not applicable? But then you are, and on the other hand, you are praising these 4 places as achieving your best economic situation. So is that a contradiction in your own argument? No, in your own argument, in Chris Patten's argument. So this one is, I guess I cannot accept it. But maybe we can have some more discussion up later on what do you think about Asian values, or are these Asian values still applicable in Hong Kong? And when we are seeing that freedom, democracy, and human rights are being strongly suppressed in nowadays, do we see that the old type of Asian values should be upheld again, rather than democracy or human rights standards? Another point is brings us to freedom and democracy, because when he talks about, Chris Patten has talked about his passion towards bringing freedom and democracy to Asia, not just in Hong Kong. He has actually made his efforts to go against all kinds of powers in his argument, and it is his ambition to have China signing all the UN treaties, and which is governing human rights. I guess that some of the international UN treaties on human rights are being applicable in Hong Kong. Mainly, if we're talking about the one China is not willing to sign, is the ICCPR, Civil and Political Rights. So I guess it's not surprising for the Chinese not to sign this treaty. But then it comes to another point: is what is the effect of signing these kind of UN treaties? Chris Patten has focusing, we have to make China align their human rights standards, international human rights standards. But what is the effect of signing these treaties? We do know that Hong Kong has been ratified all these kind of human rights treaties for more than 30 years of time, but see what our development has been. We only got the legislation on different kinds of equal opportunities for being about 20 years ago, or less than 20 years. Yeah, less than 20 years. So what exactly are these power for signing these treaties? Even if China has signed these treaties or human rights standards, can other countries and the UN do anything to change their internal affairs? All these are maybe they could just internationally condemn the situation, which actually many of the human rights organizations and many governments has been doing the same role already, condemning China's human rights situation, just like in Tibet or in other places. Does that make any difference, or can we empower this kind of international obligations or international forces to make real power in controlling different countries' human rights standards? Or these kinds of human rights situation or UN institutions are still being governed by a few, so-called powers. I.e., just a few countries upholding, these international powers, and whereas other countries, they do not have a say in, their own internal affairs or to change other countries' situation. So it comes to, although Chris Patten has a good view in, asking the China to sign up all these international treaties, but then China, I don't think it's, silly enough to not know the influence of not signing these treaties, because they do not have, real power in changing their own human rights situation. And all these human rights values, Asian values, or democracy has actually brought to the, it's the focal point of today's discussion, is what exactly are these human rights values, Asian values, have an impact on the current situation, on Hong Kong's current situation. What exactly are the challenges we are facing now, and how these concepts and what, the predictions Chris Patten have talked about, are they still applicable and helping Hong Kong to proceed with our democratic movement? I guess in our current situation, a few kinds of challenges could be identified. For, after handover for 15 years, there are actually Chris Patten has talked about, or not just Chris Patten, many of us has been talking about, there are a few good values in Hong Kong that helps Hong Kong to maintain its free market economy, freedom, and also the pace in proceeding for democratic movement, which include, I was just talking or chatting with my friends just now, these good qualities include strong civil society, clean civil service, participative government, independence court, real sense of pluralism, freedom of worship and speech. But then to us, it seems that all these good values are being jeopardized these days. We do not have a strong civil society right now. It's not because, I would go into details for all these good values. But then I guess it's sad to say that it is not just because of the Chinese government's interference which makes us to this situation. Sometimes we can see that it is our own Hong Kong citizen giving up our own value, our own core value to, for economic benefits or fake economic benefits or interpretations. Just like, when we are talking about different kinds of challenges, the first one is the civil participation in the government. We can see that we, as a civil society, they are restricting participation channels in the government. All of the appointment systems are now being appointing like mind with the government citizens to these advisory bodies or different kinds of governmental positions, which actually channels for public participation in different kinds of political issues, policy issues are being restricted. Consultation period are being shortened or without any notice, or you may not even know there is a consultation going on. So how you can expect civil society to participate in the government's decision making? And also, actually, all these appointments, they do not have real power. I have been sitting on 2 committees, which of course, when compared with you, I guess really, really, really little, involvement in the institution or the decision-making process. I'm not too sure. But then, in my experience in sitting in some of the government committees, just the previous one is the promotion on racial harmony, and the current one is Women's Commission. It is, interesting to see that when the first establishment of the Committee on the Promotion of Racial Harmony, it is actually due to the legislation on racial discrimination that period. The government would like to consolidate more public opinion on how the legislation should go forward and what is the racial discrimination situation in Hong Kong. That's why a committee was formed at that time to collect public opinion, especially advocates, human rights advocates, NGO frontline practitioners. They do see what's the clients having difficulties in living in Hong Kong. So at that time, the committee was quite a good mix of advocates and human rights advocates. And maybe because of that legislation period, a lot of idea, and the government was quite open towards human rights standards. We have introduced a lot of experience or examples, overseas examples, on how to guard against racial discrimination. And after a long debate, we can see that the final piece of legislation were, of course, not totally in line with the international standard, but it got some critical or crucial elements which has been input by the public. But then after the legislation, we can see that in no sense at all, the committee just start to reform itself too. I mean, a few months ago, because all these kinds of committee is just only 6 years term. After 6 years, we have to retire. So I have been retired from that committee. So I revisit that committee again a few months ago. And then the government official actually told me that, yes, we are not now quite focusing on human rights or racial discrimination issues anymore, because the name of this committee is promoting racial harmony. So now we are just promote racial harmony rather than to maintain racial equality. I mean, racial equality and racial harmony, is that two different sense? It's actually the same sense. If you do not have equality, how can you have harmony? But then the government is so reluctant to see the importance of equality. We just keep on saying that our main focus now is to get different people of different races together and have some carnivals or educational programs. So this is what the government has so-called about harmony. And all the sense of equality seems have forgotten. And all the debates we have talked about at that time just vanish in 2 months period of time. So this, I mean, you can see that this kind of committee's agenda actually controls the members' opinions on what the public can talk about towards the government. So you can see that there is restrictions or a shrinking agenda on this kind of public participation. Actually, these kind of participation platforms are not many. So if all these platforms are shrinking, our participation rates are also shrinking as well. Another challenge you can see that is the most crucial one is the freedom of speech and the press freedom nowadays. You can see that all of the newspaper reportings are being restricted, no matter in restricted zones or restricted in the internet. So it's another challenge of whether we can still uphold our freedom of speech or press freedom in this Chinese intervention. And the third challenge I would like to say is the shaping of public opinion and the public agenda, because what's the public or what's the civil society they could talk about or participate, mainly directed by the government. Just like we have certain bills coming up, then we will have a discussion on that area. But then other areas seems that people do not care about or people do not see the importance to participate. Just like in women's issues has been talking about for more than 10 years. But then we do not have a new piece of legislation coming up. So even the government themselves do not see upholding gender equality as a pressing issue. So in this sense, the civil society could not have a channel or could not have the atmosphere to promote what is gender equality under these circumstances. And also the fourth pressing issues will be the dividing civil society. Dividing civil society in the sense that, I mean, it's not just in between the civil society and the government. We are also talking about within the civil society and also the civil society with the public. we can see that nowadays there are lots of reporting on so-called the post-80s radical advocates, and also the dividing Democrats among different camps. So all this actually have divided their negotiation power, because the government or the anti-democrats, they have seized that being a democratic camp, you yourself are being so divided. You do not have a unified voice, or your voice could not gain public support because it's so divided, and your arguments are no longer based on rational or philosophical arguments, but then it's always talking about movement, radical movement, which actually all these kind of radical movements have attracted the media rather than their reason behind. Why do they have such kind of radical movement? So I guess this another point is the civil society's argument could not come to the public. It could not be reappear to the public why they are having such kind of demonstration or protest from time to time. Just like previously during the chief executive election, on the same day, we have lots of human rights advocates or the civil society organizations. They have organized a huge protest outside the venue of the election. But then what has been the focus? The media has not focused on why they have been protested that way. But then their reason for protesting is because they have been against the concept or the idea of small circle election. But then the focus of the media at that time has just shifted to pepper spray or the power of the police. Of course, those are also important issues or agenda, but then it is not the primary focus for that protest. All these reasons for being the advocates to come out has not been being focused by the media, and the public could not gain understanding of why these protesters has been coming out to protest. But then their irrational ways or their fighting with the police has just been another negative image of our civil society. So the fifth one, the challenge is our religious freedom and also some of the civil rights oriented protections. I guess after the legislation against racial discrimination, we do not have another piece of equal rights legislation coming up. Although we did talk about a lot during the time before the handover, just such as the age discrimination legislation or people with different sexual orientation. All these kinds of equality debates or protection, which seems do not gain any focus anymore, rather than just focusing on political rights these days. But social rights are actually another point we should get back to track, because these are protecting personal individual values. It's upholding one's dignity in living in the society. But all these are being diverse away with our political agenda. Then I can see that, as mentioned, China's intervention is always there, and we have been protected. China has been interfering on our democratic movement, so it's not something surprising. We can see that we have a rollback in our democratic movement. But I guess it's sad to see that, as I've mentioned before, is how Hong Kong people are willing to give up their own core values on the rule of law and on democratic movement towards our economic benefits, which these economic benefits are actually not verified. Just like during our debates on the right of abode 10 years ago on the mainland-born children by the Hong Kong citizens, and also the current debate on foreign domestic helpers, their right of abode issues. We have been seeing different kinds of pressures and also figures by the government or by different kinds of institutions saying that if we grant them right of abode to Hong Kong, how many people will be flooding into Hong Kong, and how many of them will be getting the social welfare, which would be jeopardizing our welfare system, and they will be using up Hong Kong's resources. So in that sense, people and the public starts to worry about whether, if the flooding in of migrants would really affect Hong Kong's economic situation. And it's also a sense of identity as well, because it seems like you are the outsiders and you are coming in to get our resources. This is probably many of the arguments we have heard about. And because of these arguments, some Hong Kong people are willing to seek the Chinese interpretation on our basic law, rather than solving this financial situation internally. So actually, if you are seeking interpretation, you are giving up your autonomy on your own ruling. So, but then rule of law and Hong Kong's autonomy has always been our core value in Hong Kong. So what makes Hong Kong people willing to give up their own core value? Because of this unverified economic, threats. But then these threats are actually do not have real evidence behind facing about. So I guess these are all what is pathetic about in these days, is how Hong Kong people sees its own identity and Hong Kong's core value, and in the willingness in giving up its own Hong Kong's core value. Of course, we do see that these debates, as just mentioned, is about the growing Hong Kong identity. It's like building a wall between Hong Kong and elsewhere. I guess this is not surprising for us to see this situation coming up, especially when we, after the handover, became a city of China rather than a special administrative region because of the Chinese intervention. And of course, our government's restricted public participation, which we do not have a say in our governance. This makes Hong Kong people having a threat towards who Hong Kong people really are. Do we still have a say in this piece of land? So this actually threatens Hong Kong's identity. So in this sense, psychologically, I guess we have to uphold this identity and to sometimes make what I so-called irrational decisions on seeking the interpretation. So it's a kind of psychological reaction, I guess. So, but then it drives us to whether this kind of situation could be changed, or is this still the same way that Hong Kong have to go beyond? If we are talking about the dividing civil society, much of this situation is caused internally by the civil societies themselves or the organizations. Why I'm saying that? Because when I was working in a human rights organization at that period of time, a few years ago, I did not see such kind of dividing civil society as compared to now. At that time, we have a lot of platform. I think most of you still remember our first July 1st demonstration, which called so many Hong Kong people, which is historical, right, on the streets to demonstrate. But then this kind of cohesion or the ability for these civil societies organization to call huge demonstration are being, less and less powerful. You can see that our recent demonstrations or protests, the number or the participation rates are dropping. It's not because of people are not agreeing with their ideology or what they are advocating for. It's probably the way they protest or they demonstrate. You can see our first few times of the July 1st demonstration, which actually I have helped organizing it because of the Civil Human Rights Front, which is the organizer, and my organization is one of the members of this Civil Human Rights Front. So at that time, the Civil Human Rights Front was able to bind a lot of civil society organizations with having different kinds of values or advocating on different kinds of issues. because of their demonstration, I mean the forms of demonstration or how it can be proceeded, it is quite friendly for people who do not have a strong sense of civil liberty, or they are not usual advocates, or maybe just common citizens. They know or they do have a friendly environment to get involved in this demonstration. But then right now it's quite contradicting, because on one hand, these organizations are advocating for the same value, actually 10 years ago, and now these values are just the same: human rights, democracy. But then the way of demonstrations or the protests are being different from what we so-called friendly demonstrations to now being radical demonstrations. I'm not saying that being radical is wrong, because it is another way to rediscover another side of restrictions on freedom of expressions because of the police suppression towards all these kinds of demonstration, using the reason that they are against public security or stability of the society. So it's actually radical side of protest can discover another restrictions or make these kinds of restrictions appear to the public. But then being radical actually have barred some of the general public in participating in these kinds of demonstrations. And that's why we can see that there is a restrictions. I mean, the number of participants are shrinking. It is very straightforward for the government to interpret these demonstrations. At the first July demonstration, we got lots of demonstrators. That's what convinced the government on this 23 legislation bill. But then right now, all this kind of demonstration are being interpreted by the government that because of the limited number of participants, your argument is not that sound. But then is it really not that sound or not that important to Hong Kong? It is not. But then just the way of protest or demonstration is not that friendly for many of the public to participate anymore. Or even some of the civil societies organizations, because of their values towards different kinds of issues, they may not help out or participate in some other like-minded organizations' actions. So this actually, we can see that there is a split or dividing situation among the civil society. I guess if we have to unify the civil society, what in my sense is, of course, being in a good way, we can have more communication platform among this civil society organization and also with the political parties. Of course, this is not easy to achieve. And sometimes we can see that some of the civil society organizations, they do want to participate or help out other organizations. Just like in the example of foreign domestic helpers seeking the right of abode issues, we can see that actually some of the local civil societies organizations, they do want to help the foreign domestic helpers groups and organizations or the migrant workers groups to help them to strive for the right of abode. But then they do not know the argument, or they do not know the legislations or the law behind the arguments. So they could not participate, because even if they want to, they're just afraid that their participation will ruin the actions taken by the foreign domestic workers group. So in that sense, that the foreign domestic workers groups or the migrant groups, they have really limited support by local organizations. In that sense, actually, even if the local groups, they would like to help out, they do not have channels, or they do not know how to help or how to participate in all these kinds of issues. So I guess that's why having another kind of platform, which just for informational or knowledge exchange on some pressing issues, may help to strengthen our civil societies again. Another way is the relationship with the government, where the civil society could still uphold their ideology, and where the advocates have enough knowledge on certain issues, or because if we are talking about human rights advocates, most of the time we have been using UN's international treaties as our argument. But then we find that some of the new advocates themselves, they do not have this knowledge. So if you do not have this knowledge, how you could advocate to the government and the public the importance of international human rights standards in Hong Kong? So I guess some of the advocates themselves have to be re-educated as well. And now seeing Hong Kong as, although it has been under international spotlight for a few years ago, I guess during the handover period of time, Hong Kong was under international spotlight. But then I guess we have to admit that this spotlight is dimming right now. And Hong Kong is no longer catching up with international attention. The attention has been directly to the Chinese government, not through Hong Kong anymore. If we are talking about free market economy, overseas Chinese businessmen, they do not need to make business through Hong Kong already because of the open market. And also Hong Kong spotlight is dimming in that sense that if being an advocate or being a public, you would like to gain international pleasure in pressing Hong Kong government in different human rights or democratic movement, it is quite difficult in these days because lack of international interest in Hong Kong do not help Hong Kong to gain international pressure, pressuring the Chinese government, which helps Hong Kong's movement. So I guess this one is another challenge, is how Hong Kong as being right now seems to be isolating itself from the international platform, how we can still use international pressure to press our government on our democratic movement. But then saying international interest in Hong Kong, it is also quite ironic to say that Hong Kong's human rights development and democratic movement has never been an interest for many international platforms, even if during the time of handover. Because if it is so interesting for the British and the Chinese government to argue about Hong Kong's democratic movement, why did the British did not grant democracy in Hong Kong during their ruling time? If the British government really thinks that this is such important issue in Hong Kong to uphold its human rights and democracy. So we can see that actually, democratic movement or human rights agenda as being used by international platforms is just a kind of tactic to go against the Chinese government, or it's just kind of methods to seek out the defects of the Chinese government. When this power in discovering the Chinese drawbacks is no longer able to being used by the international platforms, so Hong Kong's value also decrease as well. So I guess it is another way we have to see how Hong Kong needs to use or can gain back the international spotlight. So I guess there are a few final focus. Yeah, that's how we as Hong Kong to proceed in the coming days. Hong Kong actually as its own, I guess, on behalf of semi-advocates, I still see myself as advocating for human rights. I guess it's important to, as an advocate, to uphold the human rights standard, not to give out or giving these standards away because of the lack of discussion in Hong Kong or the lack of interest in Hong Kong citizens. Even though there are lack of discussion on equality right now, but still it is, if you think that these are the basic principles or values, you have to still go on with it. And I guess this is one of the major binding points for our civil society to get back together, is to unify an agenda on what exactly are important to Hong Kong's development. And also not to give up its own freedom and rights, especially during these days when we are seeing there are threats on our freedom of expression and press freedoms. I guess some of our media has been shifting their direction or is unable to uphold their press freedom anymore. But then there are still reporters making their very effort in this sense to make what they would like to report to the public being visualized or being able to still let all of us know what's going on in Hong Kong or how they are being suppressed. Actually, last week I've been to the Human Rights Press Award, and it's sad to see that when talking to the organizers, they said that last year we got the press award, we got more than 300 entries competing for, just about 10 awards on human rights issues. But this year, there's less than 200. So we can see that there's a strength. This strength is not just due to the suppression, but how the media or their company sees human rights as an important issue in their reports. They may not see human rights as an agenda in their newspaper or in their press report anymore. That's why the entries are being less and less and few. And among these 200 entries, most of them are overseas entries, not local newspapers or local reports. And our big 4 Chinese and English channels, they did not have any entry as well. So mainly are from, you can name it, from Apple Daily, if you're talking about local media. Apple Daily, South China, they do got a few, or RTHK. These are the only remaining media that are still able to work on some human rights issue, not just in Hong Kong, but also they're reporting human rights issues in China or discovering any violations in China as well. So I guess, being a member of the public, we do have to empower our press to uphold their integrity or dignity towards reporting human rights issues. And for Hong Kong as part of China, Chris Patten has actually talked about Hong Kong as part of China. China will be seeing upcoming a lot of political debates. We can see actually right now, people in China asking for democracy or participation in different kinds of political issues. This is uprising. And Hong Kong, as an example, can actually reinforce its experience in how to encourage public opinion or public debate in different political issues. And not just within China, but also in the Asia region. Visiting Singapore, Singapore has actually took a lot of Hong Kong examples in their ruling or governing policies. They do take Hong Kong's public participation in the government as a recent example. Because of the last year's election in Singapore, you can see that there are lots of youth coming up against the authoritarian Singapore government. So the Singapore government do see there is a threat of public opinion and the rising, increasing public interest in political participations. And they have been actually taking Hong Kong as an example. So in that sense, Hong Kong can actually still contribute ourselves as a free society, as a strong public participation society to these Asian countries as example. And lastly, as an international platform, I guess under globalization, Hong Kong's free market economy is still something the other countries are longing for and still value or treasures Hong Kong's market. So I guess in that sense is my few humble opinion about this book. And I do hope any of you to give me any feedback on these positions.
Thank you very much, Raees. I'm always tempted to add my own views, but this evening I'm just a director. I'm not a speaker. directed to the mic to speak to people. But before that, I just have to, today we are very sensitive about declaration of interest. I should have declared my interest. I'm a member of the Democratic Party, okay? So you know a bit about my political inclination. Chris Patten, at that time in Hong Kong, he characterized himself very much similar to Milton Friedman. Chris himself is, he was the chair of the Conservative Party, but he belongs to what we call the left wing of the Conservative Party. But then he considered himself to be a liberal Democrat in small letter, okay? Not capital letter. So he considered himself to be the small letter liberal Democrat in Conservative Party in capital letter. Okay, so I hope I make a little bit contribution in that particular fact of his political inclination and his own political affiliation. I'll leave it to the floor. Any comments, any questions, or you want to raise? Okay, the mic is over there for that. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of that. It's very interesting to hear your perspective. I have a million questions, but I'll keep it to one.
Okay.
I was very interested when what you were talking about the racial promotion of harmony as opposed to racial equality. And I put it to you maybe the other way around. Perhaps you can't have racial equality until you have promoted racial harmony. And I give you the example from the UK, where I'm from, and I work for a very big, well-known listed company, which had its, obviously the UK, as you know, has very strong racial equality and racial discrimination laws and has done for a long time. This company had its own policies, had very strong racial policies, and yet really, and we had training and workshops, etc. But what it came down to was a guy in a room, closed doors, saying, well, I think Indians make good workers, but I think we want to have the British guy this time. And, and that was only 10 years ago. Outrageous, and I'm ashamed to say I was an employee. I just sort of went along with this at the time, but it really made me think perhaps racial equality legislation really just drives it deep into the very heart of people, where you can't do anything about that. And in Hong Kong, perhaps we don't have so much racial equality legislation, but if the government's promoting racial harmony, perhaps that's a very good step to actually removing that inherent racism within people, so that perhaps you don't need so much strong equality legislation. So that's my question, or interested in your views on that. Thank you.
Raees?
Yes, I guess this is one of the reasons given by the government as well, because you do need racial harmony so that there would be racial equality, and people would see different races as not being classified according to race, but according to ability. So if being a racially harmonized society, then people will respect each other, then the use of law will be decreased. I guess there's two sides to see this situation. Of course, when during that time when we're talking about legislation on racial discrimination, the government did take the Singapore experience, because Singapore, they do not have a single piece of legislation on racial discrimination. But then Singapore has a huge ethnic composition in its own population. So why Singapore could maintain its racial harmony as outsiders see? But of course, if you're asking a Singaporean, they may not be agreeing on this position. Seems they do not have a lot of racial tensions, even if there is no piece of legislation. But I guess to my point is legislation or our discussion on racial equality is providing baseline protection. So if anyone, because education of course is important, but you cannot reach education for every individual. There are always, even though on one hand you are being educated, and on the other hand your deep-rooted racist ideas are still there. So we still need a legislation to protect all this unexpected experience or negative experience. So I guess it is a two-way of promoting racial equality and racial harmony. It cannot be just either way. So when the government has shifted, because when we are talking about our early days of the committee's work on racial equality, promoting racial equality is also through a way of getting public participation or public understanding towards different ethnicity. So at that time, it's also actually a promotion of racial harmony. I cannot say it is two mutual understanding. So I guess the government right now is to acknowledge both importance of racial equality and harmony, and not just focusing on harmony, but not equality anymore. Because we see that when we're talking about equality, we mainly talk about the institutionalized discrimination or the policies which have discriminative elements in it. Just like when we are talking about education for ethnic minorities children in Hong Kong. So all these, even the children themselves are playing harmoniously in the school environment. But the difficulty in assessing or learning Chinese is discriminatory to these ethnic minorities children. So when we are talking about equal rights or equality in racial standing, we are talking about policies or institutional settings mainly.
Yeah. Okay. By doing the job of the moderator, I forgot to ask, for those who raise questions, comments, please identify yourself, okay? Who next want to say something? And on that particular, any other questions or points of interest you want to raise? Yes. Identify yourself, please.
I enjoyed your talk very much. I think you came over very well, and I was quite intrigued, not surprised really, when you said that Chris Patten was your idol. I think he is of a number of people. We can all learn from Chris Patten because he was a good wordsmith, whether it was a spoken word or the written word. He was a good decision maker, and he mixed well with people of the Dan Tart, you know, that person as well, mixed well with all people. So we can learn from him. And I can remember him landing at Queen's Pier. And afterwards we went into the City Hall and he spoke. And he came over very well, as he always did when he spoke. Came over very well, and I believe everyone was fully behind Chris Patten and thought he was the right man for the job. They thought, that's what they thought. And yet after a while, he became rather antagonistic to China. And was that really the way to proceed? And I think as far as government servants were concerned, I think half the government servants were very strongly behind Patten, and the other half, I would say, were more David Wilson people who felt that we should you know, be more friendly to China. Because if David Wilson had been here at the time, there would have been a through train. This is what they talked about. But of course, Chris Patten upset that entirely. There was no through train. And it was a pity, really. They were both nice people, both of them. That's one thing. Wouldn't we have been better off with David Wilson rather than Chris Patten, who was more China-friendly? And the second point I wanted to raise, you talk a lot about Asian values. And of course I know what you mean. I'm very old-fashioned. I was born in 1920, many years ago. And my grandfather, for example, Victorian period, don't you think there's some similarity? I wouldn't say the same, but don't you think there's some similarity between Victorian values in England on the one hand and Confucian values on the other? Aren't they similar to a large degree?
Thank you.
I do think it is quite similar, actually. It is, yeah, it is so, to a certain extent.
Huh?
To a certain extent, it is quite similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my second question was, all right, if you say they're very similar, I mean, in my grandfather's time, they were Victorian values, but now we've come away from those now, and I suppose China will gradually come away from Confucian values. And my other question was, wouldn't we have been better off with David Wilson?
Well, I guess it's better off in which sense? It depends on.
Well, there would have been a through train. We completely disrupted things to Chris Patten. We had to reorganise things to come through after the handover in 1st of July 1997.
Well, I do not think we need to come through a messy consequence left behind by Chris Patten, because I guess it's the acceptance of Chinese towards Chris Patten's ideology. If personally, I do agree with his ideology. That's why I do not think there's a mess left behind. But then, of course, to the Chinese government, they do not agree with it. That's why they have to so-called fix Hong Kong back on track. So in that sense, will David Wilson do a better job? I guess if for the relationship with China or the messy stuff left behind by Chris Patten, it probably would. So, but then that may not be what who have been advocating for democracy would like to see about if we're going on track with the Chinese values.
I guess I must say something on this.
Okay.
Being the one who on that no-through train in 1997. Well, I got on the train in 1995, and well know that there will be no through train. But I have to say, within the Democratic Party, I still remember that night, I should say that night, when we were debating whether we should be supporting Patten's proposal, including a few very sensitive issues about trading of votes with some of the pro-Chinese legislators. Our judgment at that time was, no matter whether there will be any food trade, and we well know if we pass that amendments to the legislative composition for 1995, we will not have a food train. But we consider that as important because democracy is not just the institution. Democracy is about the people. And when the society have experienced an atmosphere of democracy, it will never go back. Although there may be some retrenchment, but that retrenchment will not be so far back if it were for Wilson to be the governor at that time. I definitely will agree with you. Instead of Chris Patten, if it's Wilson, I would say we definitely will have a full train. And I definitely will not be on that train. And I would say, after all this year, I would have no regret at all that I stepped out of the train in 1997 because we got back on it in 1998. So that is not an issue at all, the disruption for us. Although there are ups and downs in development in democracy, but I would say that few years, look at how much our Hong Kong government has been opened up. And I guess that is the crucial part, because when you start opening the government in terms of access to information, is accountability to the people, you will never be able to get back. That is my same prediction for 2017, a few years later, when we have, no matter what kind of direct election for our chief executive, you will never be able to go back. And once that vote is given to the public, you will never be able to take any back. So I do consider that experience is an important part in that few years. But that's my own, just my personal view as a Democrat. Okay, any questions and comments over there? And please identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is David Ho. It's just from outside. I just have one question: is there any concrete way for Hong Kong in human rights issue to make history by being in such a unique historical background, in taking advantage of being really a city of East meets West?
Oh. Okay, I'll try. A concrete way to make it historical, I guess, is about to make history. So it would be, if we are talking about East meet West, it would like, you know, we are talking about China meeting the Western value or human rights value. So in that sense, I guess there are certain human rights standards, which actually Hong Kong is making history already, just like when we are upholding the ICCPR, which China is not being a signatory. ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And if we have a full election on this chief executive, I guess this is a really historical moment. And what's so-called, Chris Patten's so-called Asian value is being the authoritarian value in ruling. So if it is really achieving in 2017 that we have a universal suffrage, then that would be a historical example, I guess.
Okay. Yes. You mean universal suffrage in 5 years' time? Well, let's wait and see. No one can see the crystal ball what happened 5 years later. Okay. Yes, the lady in front.
My name is Karen, a Raees friend and also an alumnus of this university. I have two things to mention. First of all, is that I'm not sure whether my feeling is correct. I think that one character of Hong Kong people is that we used to be very confident. We were very confident about ourselves, and we were very confident about our society and our government. We thought that our government could deliver. But nowadays, it seems that we lack that kind of confidence that our government can deliver. That's why we feel that when we think that foreign domestic helpers may get the right to vote, and people who come from across the border and give birth to their babies will eventually take up our resources, and our interests are under threat. It seems that because we do not believe that our government can handle this, we don't believe that our government can help us defending our core values, our resources, and so we try to do things, and we try to defend our interests. That's why some people would want to advertise on newspapers and try to defend our interests, and we also try to maybe sometimes to give some very harsh comments about foreigners. But it seems that we're not afraid of people who come from other countries. We may be afraid of people who come from other so-called less developed countries, or people who may come and just to take our resources. So I'm asking whether is it that we lack confidence of our society and governments, that's why we feel that we're under threat. But we used to be quite confident. As a Hong Kong person, that I grew up in Hong Kong. And second thing is, as ordinary citizens, how do we help defending our freedom and democracy other than going to protest every year or once or twice every year? What exactly can we do? And how do you see our next generation? Do you think that our next generation, because nowadays they come out more, even though they tend to be radical, some of them. But I'm a teacher. I feel that from recent CE election, it seems even though it seems that many bad things came out, one positive thing as I got from my students is that even though before they didn't read newspaper, they were not interested at all in social affairs. But then, because of all the rumors, all the interesting details, about our CE election, they read more newspaper articles and they got more interest. So and on that note, I think that I'm cautiously confident or cautiously optimistic about the development of civil society because of this development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lack of confidence in government, I guess it is quite related to what I've talked about is the loss of Hong Kong identity. Just like we are giving up our own values or identity to the Chinese government, or being absorbed as one of the Chinese city rather than a special administrative region. I guess this is what we can see on the other hand is the loss of confidence in our government. And the loss is not just because of the China's intervention. I can see it's like it's due to our lack of understanding to what's happening inside China, because just right before the handover on the June 4th incident, we can see that Hong Kong people are being threatened by the Chinese ruling. So this actually has developed a mistrust towards the Chinese government, and this mistrust has actually lingered to now. So I guess this is normal for Hong Kong people, not trusting the Chinese government, and being Hong Kong government giving ways or giving benefits. You can see, some of the Hong Kong people as interpret giving benefits to the mainland. This, of course, grow a threat in Hong Kong's own identity. So I guess it's on one hand is the understanding towards the mainland, and on the other hand is whether Hong Kong people can still participate in every government decision making. I cannot say that we do have a democratic government before the handover, but then I guess not just before the handover, but also after the handover, right after the handover, we do have more channels to express ourselves or for the public to participate or to give suggestions to the government, whether or not they are being taken or not. But then there are still these kind of channels, but then we can see that these channels are being less and less these days, and it seems like the government have put forward a lot of critical policies straightforward without public consultations. I guess this one is another threat to Hong Kong people, whether we still have a sense of autonomy towards this land. And this is our lack of confidence, I guess it is.
Well, as an academic, I would say, no matter in theories of sociology, psychology, politics, etc., there's always something very similar to the saying that if one gets less confident, one tends to be more defensive, and which is, it is common theme across different area of knowledge we understand. So if you look at statistics presented by our colleagues Robert Zhong in Hong Kong U, and you know that confidence has been dropping, and towards a lot of things, issues about our own liberty, about our power of the government, and that sort of thing. So I guess what we observe are quite consistent in various aspects of theories. Okay, there's a gentleman on the fourth row. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Terence Yao, I'm a Hong Kong U alumnus. Very interesting talk, but if I may go back to Chris Patten, which I think is the subject of this talk, right? Because I'm not a British, so I'm not looking at it. I'm perhaps a less admiring and referent of Chris Patten, but I'm also not looking at Chris Patten from a mainland Chinese point of view, which I think is more driven by politics and nationalism. Okay, I must admit my memory of Chris Patten is kind of vague now after 15 years, right? And I haven't read his book, or maybe only part of it. But anyway, it struck me as he did, I'm sure that many of you, as a very charismatic and witty politician, right? Very articulate, and as this gentleman, the word used by this gentleman, very good, a wordsmith, right? A great wordsmith, okay? Well, I mean, all these are true, but there are a few sort of impressions I have of him, which may or may not be shared by you, First of all, I think I jotted down something, I think he seemed to be more obsessed with politics than with economics or social issues during his tenure. Maybe he was lucky at that time because Hong Kong's economy was having a good going, and he didn't have to worry about that, and he had a great civil service to help him. So he seemed to be a one-subject man, one-subject governor, which was politics, arguing with China and all that, So I can't recall what he has done or said on, for example, welfareism or social justice, the wealth gap and so on. Admittedly, those issues may be at that time, we're not so serious at that time. So maybe Dr. Law can also comment on this, being an expert that you are. Secondly, let me see. I think it's not a question of what, but how he dealt with China at that time. The question is how. It seems that he always took the moral high ground, okay, and wanted to lecture China on what to do and what not to do. I think this was more suited to his present role as the Chancellor of Oxford University, which I presume he still is now, rather than as a politician or the governor at that time, right? Since you had to deal with a very complex animal like the Chinese government at that time, right? I don't think this was the way to go. And he has been proven to be wrong because he did not get anywhere with his strategy or non-strategy. Okay. Thirdly, I think, well, this may not be a very flattering comment, but I think he is great on style, but less on substance. Okay. He is, like I said, he's very impressive, very charming, but I'm not sure how much substance he has, especially during his tenure, because it's one issue. Like I said, his main agenda was China, and he, sadly and disastrously failed on this count. I don't see what he has achieved in his dealing with China, you see. So like I said, these were all, fleeting impressions of Chris Patten, after 15 years after he was, sorry, he was gone. So you may or may not agree with me, speakers and the audience, but I mean, I'm just putting forth my views and would like to invite your comments or disagreements or whatever. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I guess I've mentioned one point which is similar to your thought as well, is I do admire or appreciate his passion towards human rights and democracy. But I also have, say a line is whether it is successful or not is still questionable, because such kind of moral high ground argument may not be that convincing for those who do not have such kind of upholding value. So I do agree with you that his moral high ground may not be convincing the Chinese government in shifting towards the value on human rights or democracy. So it's still, the result is still foreseeable whether China could achieve democracy and whether such kind of achievement has been linked with that period of time or that argument. I guess at this point I do, to a large extent, agree with you. And obsess on politics rather than economics. I guess this one, yeah. CK, you may probably know more about me.
Chris cannot be counted as a very good politician, to me. He failed his election before he came to Hong Kong. And one of the basic reasons he failed his election is very consistent in his pattern. If you look at his behavior in Hong Kong, he's more concerned with what he believes instead of what other people believe. As a politician, a most successful politician who tends to consider more what other people believe instead of what one owns belief. If you talk about what he has achieved in Hong Kong, I can name quite a number, but just restrict to one very simple example is because although he's the liberal part of the Conservative Party, when he came to Hong Kong, he considered the Hong Kong conservatives as even conservative than, I should say it the other way around. He considered the liberals in Hong Kong are more conservative than the conservative in the Conservative Party. So, in terms of welfareism, in 1993, he injected $2.3 million into the lotteries fund and tried to achieve what the white paper at that time wanted to achieve in 10 years within 5 years' time. Very ambitious. Before Hong Kong have a white paper on the rehabilitation, we just have a green paper. He said forget about the white paper. Let's start with the green paper and work on it within 4 years' time. So if you count every governor in Hong Kong, he's even more welfare-oriented as compared to Mary McNeil's back in the 70s. Okay? So I would say if I classify him, he is not a liberal Democrat, he's a social democrat. Because the money that he spent, well, in Hong Kong standard, he's definitely a social democrat because he tried to work on the pension scheme, the OH pension scheme, but received all the cold shoulders from Hong Kong people and definitely the accusation from the Chinese government. And at the end, he failed and he gave up. Okay? So if by all counts, he's very welfare-oriented. But I think those actions did not catch public attention very much. But his relationship with the Chinese government speak all. And so I guess that's what most people's impression of him. The other side is he's still a governor from the British government. He's protecting the British interests all the time. And I have to say quite a number of times when I was debating with him on issues, I would say at the end of the day, his decision is based on his judgment on whether it's the benefit to the British Empire at that time. But that's my personal view, okay, my interaction with him. Bernadette, yeah? I guess this is probably the last question, last comment. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Bernadette Choi. I'm working in the university. I'm also an alumna. I happen to be a columnist, and during Chris Patten's time, I was writing about Hong Kong and him every day. So I think I have some impression. It's very interesting to be thinking about Chris Patten. I agree with this gentleman that I didn't like him at that time. But I have had several close interactions with him, and so I'll also tell you my understanding of Chris Patten. I was thinking, what is a politician? I don't care whether he's liberal Democrat, social democrat, but what is he? And the funny thing is, he is very abrasive when he was in Hong Kong, absolutely abrasive. And he is very arrogant, if you look at it. He sounds like he's very democratic, but he looks down on Chinese people, including Hong Kong people. But he will make you feel that he's democratic. He'll make you feel that he's giving you democracy. So I was very, very upset when I observed every little thing that he said and he did at that time. Of course, he may be having other policies which you agree with, and therefore you feel better. But I was looking at him and I was feeling, is he getting the best deal for Hong Kong people at that time? Was he trying to get the best deal for Hong Kong people? And by well, in a way, attacking or disagreeing or even snubbing China on several accounts, he was very rude to the mainland government. Of course, mainland was not democratic. Of course, you could accuse him, but to really slap them on the face, would you get good things for Hong Kong, and would you get what we want? So I was very upset at certain points as a Hong Kong citizen when there was tremendous discord between Hong Kong government and the mainland, and we were losing out on many counts. That just because the confidence between the two governments were failing and slipping away, and no matter what you said, whatever you said, the Chinese government would say no because they don't trust you. So I thought, oh my God, what is this British governor doing for us? Is he really getting something for Hong Kong, or is he just getting a hero image for himself, and he is the British representative here? So I would say a lot of you were a teenager, so maybe you were looking at different things, but we were really seriously looking at every little thing, including democracy. You don't fight for democracy by slapping on China every day. So that was one thing. The other, an anecdote, the egg tart anecdote, and that tells you something about Chris Patten. Chris Patten is totally associated with egg tart and his love and loyalty for Hong Kong. So whenever he comes, the first thing he gets off the plane is to eat an egg tart. And he came to Hong Kong U for many of our talks and so on. And so we said, we'll give you egg tarts. He said, no, I've done it on camera already. So when he comes again, don't give him egg tarts because he only eats it in front of the camera and he's been eating too many. So behind the camera, he'll tell you, I don't want any more egg tarts. Thank you. So that's one Chris Patten for you. I want to also say something about Raees today. I was watching you and you were making so many questions, comments, and so on. And some of them were contradicting, I felt. But I was looking at a very charming, convincing, charming, beautiful advocate. And I said she could advocate anything and she'll win. And I think it's this passion and this youthfulness that although some of what you said were, I would say, you know, we could still argue for another 12 hours or 24 hours, and I would still debate with you. But I think as society moves on, just like Chris Patten, whether you like him or not, and whether he's a good politician or not, he did something at that point of history, and it changed a lot of things. It's not easy to see whether it's right or wrong. Maybe even if David Wilson were here, Hong Kong would still be in a mess. But we move on, and with the younger generation, they will carry on, and there was some fighting, and then some losing, and then some. We talk about plurality. My God, that's terribly difficult. With plurality, you will argue for another 36 hours. So that's how we move on with democracy, with arguing, fighting, and remembering that some of the values we have to fight for, and some of them would actually be contradictory, but that's how we move forward with Chris Patten and with Raees.
Okay, Raees, you'd like to say the last few words?
Okay, I do think it is sometimes, as this gentleman has talked about, it is difficult to uphold a moral high ground when you are so-called labeling yourself as advocates. Because when you have certain kind of strong values or thoughts which you do not want to give way, just like it's not just communicating with the public as well. Even if within the civil society, you cannot easily to persuade your moral high ground among ourselves. So it is, I guess, that's why I say, education may be probably a best way to get other advocates to know what our argument is about, because to advocate the advocates is not easy already. What about advocating the public or even the government to be on your side is even more difficult. So I guess this is, you may say that sometimes I do have some contradictions, and that is what I have to learn about, how to clarify or make it simple for our moral high ground to be communicatable with the public and also the advocates.
Thank you very much. I agree with Bernadette very much. I really want Raees to seriously consider the possibility of moving into politics. With these words, I'd like to thank Raees again, and thank you very much for attending this evening session. I say
yes, just a few more words. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. The library has a small gift for you. These are reprints from one of our rare books, and so I hope you will remember us with this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CK, for the moderator. He did a very good job. Thank you so much.